I'm a little bit nervous about giving this presentation because the topic I'm talking about, two reasons. One, the topic I'm talking about is becoming increasingly controversial, and controversy makes me nervous. The other is I'm getting older, and so I'm forgetting things, and things aren't working for me as well. I was talking to a friend about that, about aging and how things slip our mind, and he was telling me a story that he was telling a couple of guys a joke, and he realized if they weren't LDS, they wouldn't get the joke. And so he stopped right in the middle and he said, now, you're both LDS, right? Which would be a perfectly reasonable question to ask, except he was standing in the baptismal font in the temple, and these were the two witnesses. So for months afterwards, I'd say to him, are you LDS? I was talking to him last night about the new policy change in the church that allows women to be witnesses. He was standing in that same font when that was announced, and the temple president came in and stopped the proceeding with all the patrons there and said, I need to read this to you, and read it, and then read it again for any clarification, and then immediately had the two men witnesses leave and started using women, and all the women were saying, I want to turn, I want to turn, I want to turn. It's great to be in this church. It's a great time to be in this church. If we were to talk about controversial subjects, the subject of same-sex attraction might not be the most controversial subject ever talked about at AMCAP, but it would be in the running. It would be in the running. And my goal today is to disrupt our thinking, to ask some questions, to think outside the box. Maybe it'll be a little bit troubling. Maybe some of us will be troubled and ask a question and look at what we're thinking. If all I do is perturb the system and get us all thinking and asking questions, that will be successful. But we might not tie a tight little bow around this and get it wrapped up. There is a dilemma. I love this quote from Mark Twain. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And there's an awful lot of things that we know for sure when it comes to this issue of same-sex attraction. There's a dilemma that LDS therapists face regarding this issue. This is a statement from the Proclamation on the Family. We further declare that God has commanded that the sacred powers of procreation are to be employed only between a man and a woman when lawfully wedded as husband and wife. Now, that's a strong statement. It's a strong statement. So as members of the church, we read this and we've heard it reiterated again and again in various ways and reaffirmed in various ways. And then in our professional lives, we go to meetings, we read literature, we talk to people, other therapists who tell us that same-sex attraction has to be valued exactly the same as heterosexual attraction, or we are harming our clients. This is a dilemma. This is a problem. This is some cognitive dissonance. This is a struggle. I think we have to ask ourselves two questions when it comes to this dissonance, this dilemma. The first question we have to ask is, do we agree with this? Back up. Do we agree with this? Do we believe that the church is right in this statement? Do we believe that it's right? Some people believe the church is right and some people don't. This statement strikes me as not on a continuum. It strikes me as a yes or no box, or an I don't know box, because it says only and commanded. Is that a correct principle? Is that a true principle? Now, there are people of good intentions who come down on both sides of that question. There are people who think the church is wrong and are waiting for a revelation, even though the brethren have said there will be none. This will remain. But there are people, good people, who come down on both sides of that question. Second question is, whatever our answer to that is, what degree of compartmentalization do we participate in as therapists when we sit in a therapy office? How much does that, our belief or disbelief in that, influence our therapy with clients who might experience same-sex attraction? Now that is on a spectrum. That is on a spectrum. There are some things that most all of us would agree on, and because of limited time today, I want to really focus and zero in on only a very specific couple of questions. So we want to just already agree on a couple of things. It is not a therapist's position to proselyte, to try to change a client's worldview, their religious or moral values. That's not our job. That is not our job, okay? I just got through in a presentation with Jeffrey Reber, and it was a great presentation. It reminded me of the old days in AMCAP. I've been doing this for like 30 years, when we used to have a passion for figuring out how the gospel could inform our psychotherapy. Wonderful presentation. How much compartmentalization? So we agree, we're not here to proselyte. It is not our job. And then let's all agree that unconditional positive regard for all of our clients is essential to the therapeutic process. And that's not just a technique. It's not just some things we say. It's something we ought to feel. We ought to feel for every one of our clients. Okay, I loved Mark Castleman's presentation yesterday, and several times he said, we meet the client where they are. We meet them where they are. We value them where they are. We value them where they are. So we're not here to proselyte. An unconditional positive regard is essential, is absolutely essential. So today we're not going to address, there's interesting questions regarding this, but we're not going to address. Should our personal values and beliefs influence our clients' therapy goals? Ever? Ever, ever? I had a very intelligent, articulate woman in her 20s who made a strong case to me that she had every right to take her own life. And she was very suicidal. And she made a very articulate case that she had that right and nobody had the right to stop her. The police, a hospital, a therapist, anyone. And it was a deeply held belief, and she was ready to act on it. Should the therapist's personal values ever influence their client? But that's not the question we're going to talk about. I wound up calling the police once, nearly wrecked our relationship, and then I agreed to her, yeah, I guess you do have the right. She's still around. We're not even going to address the question of whether it's possible for a therapist to not let their personal values and beliefs influence their therapy. Is that even a possibility? Is it not going to come out in any way, shape, or form? I hold with people who say that value-neutral therapy really is a myth. A myth. That never has been and never will be. And boy, there's great studies to show that. You know, we're value-laden in all of our therapy, So the question we do want to ask, do our personal beliefs allow us to actively support a client in their self-determined goal to live according to gospel teachings when that goal conflicts with our broader culture? And by broader culture, I mean popular culture in the world and therapy culture, the culture of professional therapists, the culture of professional organizations. Can we support a client in their self-determined goal to live according to the gospel if it is in conflict with the culture in which we're embedded and in which they're embedded, or at least certain aspects of that culture? That's a very interesting question. Can we do this? Are there circumstances under which we can do this? Let me use the example of a case study that is fairly common for me. This would be a fairly typical client that I might see. In fact, I think at some point it was over 50% of the clients that I was seeing would have fit this scenario. A male, early to mid-20s, a returned missionary, deeply held religious beliefs and commitments. Deeply held religious beliefs and commitments. A significant level of same-sex attraction. I mean, they were feeling it strongly. Some level of compulsive behavior, sexual behavior was always there. Same-sex pornography, masturbation, fantasy, sometimes acting out. So he was caught up in this, was very discouraging to him. And he also had a significant level of heterosexual attraction. Significant. I rarely see someone who has no heterosexual attraction who's dealing with same-sex attraction. That's quite rare. Quite rare. And we'll talk about that. You might not understand that that's rare. In just a minute, we'll come back to that. We'll show a little video clip that will might surprise some of you. Okay? So this is the client. Now, the first thing I ask the client, how are you doing? What's going on with you? A little chit chat. Let's talk. And then I ask this question. What do you hope therapy will help you accomplish? What do you want to have happen in your life? What's your goal? For most of my clients, these are the sort of things I hear. I want to live the gospel. I want to be worthy. I would like to be married in the temple. I would like a family. I would like, if I could wish, I wish these feelings would go away. I wish these feelings would go away. Notice something here. This client is not exploring their sexuality. They're not searching. They're not trying to decide. They're not questioning. They come in with strong, self-determined goals. Self-determined goals. This is what I want. These are the goals that I would like to accomplish. These are the things I would like to have. Now, I've heard it said when these kinds of goals are presented, well, he's not really deciding that for himself. It's really his culture, his family, his religion. He's bowing to cultural pressures when he decides that. He can't really make a free choice because of the cultural context in which he's making that decision. And so this can't really be a free will choice. Can anyone see any problem with that reasoning? Discussion. What problem? If we say, you know, that's not really his. He's pressured into that. Yes?
That sounds like that individual's personal beliefs putting on them already, right? That's a personal value, making a judgment of someone.
Oh, so the therapist
already putting on whatever their personal beliefs are.
Okay, so the therapist or whoever might say that is actually also expressing cultural beliefs and judging their personal values. Oh yeah, absolutely. Any other problems with that? That question, that complaint that he can't really be choosing this? I think, yes?
Well, we can say that about anything or anyone. I mean, how do we, what gives us the right to suddenly say we are the person who can decide whether somebody's beliefs are freely chosen or only imposed by their culture? That would be true of any situation that would walk in the door. So are we going to start telling people what their goals should be based on something else because we think their culture is wrong no matter what they walk in with, or just this particular thing?
Great. I wish you'd had a mic on. Yeah, this could be with anything they walk in with. That line of reasoning, if we follow it to its logical conclusion, means that no goal, no opinion is legitimate and deserves our respect unless it has occurred in a cultural, social, and religious vacuum, uninfluenced by anything. It is not our position to decide why they want that, and if it's a legitimate want. Okay? Yes?
It seems like when people do come out of the closet, all of a sudden they are in that, whether they want to be or not anymore. It feels like they are stuck there, more so than what you're talking about here.
So in the other end, if they come in, the goal is I want to be gay, that's also influenced by a culture. That's also strongly influenced by a culture. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes?
Wasn't it part of our ethical obligation to be sensitive to the culture that our clients come from to begin with?
Oh yeah, yeah. We're not.
Natural
That we should be sensitive to their culture, and from their perspective. I have a Muslim client that I've been working with for a couple of years, on and off. And he said to me the other day, I hope you won't take this as an insult, but when I talk to you, it is just like talking to a Muslim. And I said, I take that as the highest compliment. Thank you so much. And I'll often say to him, what does the Quran say about this? What would the Quran say about this? And he can quote it like that. And I'll say, yeah. And is this different when you're praying? Oh yeah, it is. How do your prayers affect this? Yeah, I'm all for his religion. That's awesome. That's awesome. So this is the goal he comes in with. He's not ambivalent. He's not ambiguous. He is not searching. Now, sometimes that's not the case. Clients do come in ambiguous and searching, etc. And it can be, where do I impose? What am I imposing? How am I helping? But today we want to focus on this client. Because we want to talk about, is it ever legitimate for someone in psychotherapy to help that client work towards these goals? This client is also experiencing a profound sense of isolation. Isolation. Next slide. He feels isolated from the church, from his family, from his peers, and he's isolated from the gay community. Why would he feel isolated from the church? Why might he in this situation? Yeah?
Because of real or imagined judgments about the church as a whole and what the general belief system may be in the people, the congregation.
Real or imagined judgments. The congregation might think that these people might think that these people might think. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other reasons he'd feel isolated from the church? Yes?
Real or imagined judgments from God.
Oh, yeah. Real or imagined. I should have put that up there. Isolated from God. Real or imagined judgments from God. So this sense of isolation is profound. Yeah. Isolated from the church. Yes?
And also harsh, inappropriate criticism that he may have received from a priesthood leader.
Oh, possible.
Try to understand where he's coming from.
Yeah, harsh, inappropriate criticism of priesthood leaders, yeah?
Sometimes in some congregations, exclusion from teaching, although he's an active participant.
Exclusion from teaching or other callings, although he's an active participant. Yes?
Rejection from those they love, whether it's wife, husband, family members, it's not perceived, it's real.
Yeah, it is real, rejection. I'm going to make this observation. I don't know how to interpret it. I've been doing this sort of counseling in one form or another for 30 years. Talked to hundreds of young men. I've never met someone first person, and somebody might come up to me right after this presentation and end of that statement, who was thrown out of their house or their family because of this issue. I've never met someone first person who was thrown out. There might be someone.
There is.
I want to share something.
Yeah.
A young man who actually was just released as a bishop, whose wife has totally rejected him, will not touch him, will not talk to him, will not consider him in existence. And they still cohabitate, but he's dying.
Yeah, and that sort of rejection is, yeah. So this young man that we're talking about is feeling that. He's feeling it from family, real or imagined. He's feeling it from his peers, real or imagined. Now the level of rejection, that's interesting because for 20 years, Jan Sharman's sitting here, so I'm not sure she'll agree with me, but for over 20 years I've said to clients, you could stand in the middle of BYU campus and say, I'm gay. And over half, I'm being conservative, over half of the students there would like you more after you said that than before you said it. Now that doesn't mean there aren't going to be some harsh people and that you could be harshly treated. It's possible. It's possible, but you also have a lot of acceptance, have in the last 20 years. Why does he feel isolated from the gay community? Yeah.
Because he wants to hold on to his faith still.
Yeah. He he wants to not enter that lifestyle. He wants to hold on to his faith and live according to his teaching, according to his religious and spiritual beliefs and values. Absolutely, absolutely. So he has a deep sense of isolation. Some of it is self-imposed. Some of it is real from his environment. But he has this sense of isolation. So the question we want to zero in on today, and we want to talk about, okay? What therapy goals or outcomes for this young man are reasonable, probable, could happen, and which ones can we ethically support? Which ones can we ethically support? Now, I want to tell you this as a basis of this. I like acceptance and commitment therapy. Many of you will have been familiar with acceptance and commitment therapy. We don't have time today to go into the specifics about that therapeutic approach. It is fundamentally the idea that we're helping someone lead a rich, full, and meaningful life, not to help them be symptom-free or feel better in order to live a rich and full and meaningful life. Okay? Beautiful form of therapy that I like and think very applicable in these sorts of situations. It is summarized, but a quick and dirty summary of that would be in the Serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can. And the wisdom to know the difference. The older I get, the more profound wisdom I find in that, consolidated into that small set of words. It's a remarkably wise. It's one of those things we hear so often that it's just like a platitude and it just goes by us. But if we stop and look at it, it's a guide to a good life in many ways. I heard another version of it that I like too, that there are 3 rules in life. The first rule in life is to put up with things. The second rule in life is don't put up with things. The third rule in life is know when to do the first 2. And that's the trick, the wisdom to know the difference, okay? So what goals are possible and ethical for this young man that we can support, Now, we will have different opinions about that. People have different opinions about that. And so before we address that question and talk about what are reasonable and ethical goals to support, we need to look at our own opinions. And our own opinions on this are going to be profoundly affected by sampling error. Sampling error, both in research and in personal experience. In research, it's very difficult to get good quality research on same-sex attraction because getting a large random sample is very, very difficult. Or randomizing people into control and treatment groups, very, very difficult. And so there's a lot of low quality research that gets flung around on both sides of all these questions, okay? I'll give you an example of it. Original research that happened in the 90s on identical twins showed that if a gay man had an identical twin, there was about a 52% chance that identical twin would also be gay. That's massive. That's massive. In the general population, it's 3 or 4%. Jump up to 52% if it's an identical twin. Wow. But it was a convenience sample from gay venues, gay organizations and gay clubs. When the same research was replicated using the Australian Twin Registry and then other large-scale, more randomized registries, that 52% dropped to under 20% in many, many studies. And these are twins raised in the same household, so sharing environmental factors, it gets close to the point where they weren't sure there was any effect, genetically. But it depended on the sample, Samples recruited from gay venues, there was one that's been thrown around recently that said that people who experienced reparative therapy were more likely to be reparative or conversion therapy, which I claim I don't do either. People accuse me of it constantly, but are more likely to be suicidal, but it's recruited from gay venues. So I was talking to a client about that, and I said, there's nothing in this research that precludes the interpretation that that form of therapy is wildly successful and 90% of the people who participate in it are completely cured from homosexuality, and all you're doing is sampling the remaining 10% who are in a gay venue to be sampled. Now, do I think that's true? No. That'd surprise me. But there's nothing in the research that absolutely precludes that interpretation because it's a convenient sample. I had years ago, I had a colleague, we were actually at an AMCAP conference, and he said he was doing some research about outcomes from people who are trying to shift away from homosexuality. And he had a sample of a couple hundred people, and he was going to publish this. And I said, oh great, so you're going to publish it. I can tell you what you're going to find. There's nothing you're going to find. You're going to say some people claimed that it had worked and they changed. Some people said it made them worse. Some people left them the same. Some people said it helped them. You're going to get all of that. And I said to him, I dare you, I challenge you, if you're going to be intellectually honest, do not report any percentages. Because you know and I know that the general population will look at those percentages and say, this is the probability of success. And that is totally unsustainable from such a convenient sample. And he looked at me like he had his hand in the cookie jar. He was just anxious to report those percentages, in a random, convenient sample. How about in our personal experience? Do we have a random sample there? I don't. People, most of the guys I talk to sought me out because they think they could get some help with this, and that's what they want. Is that representative? I have no idea how representative it is. It's a convenient sample. It's a convenient sample. But we make strong statements regarding what is possible based on convenient samples, based on small convenient samples. Who are we most likely to talk to? Who are we most likely to see on television? Who are we most likely to hear from? People who have shifted away from it, or people who are caught up in it? There are some larger scale research. There is some larger scale research that has been done 3 years ago. A review of the literature by two pro-gay, very distinguished scientists, published in the New Atlantis, fall 2016, a review of the best research on same-sex attraction. In the executive summary, the understanding of sexual orientation as an innate biologically fixed property in human beings, the idea that people are born that way, is not supported by scientific evidence. Not supported. They cite one study that said as many as 80% of male adolescents who report same-sex attractions no longer do so as adults. And these are people who are very gay affirmative, but looking hard at the research. 5 weeks ago, in the journal Science, made the front page of the New York Times just at the end of this last August. The largest genetic study ever done. Now, we know from our research class, the bigger the N, the more powerful the study, right? The larger the number, right? More powerful the study. Many studies will have a couple of hundred people, maybe a couple of thousand people, maybe a couple of thousand. In fact, one study I think had up to 15, it was fairly random, 15,000. This included, listen to the number, 470,000 individuals. 470,000 individuals, and it wasn't just looking at degree of relatedness to try to assume genetics. They had genetic samples, and they combed the entire genome. It was the definitive study on genetics and same-sex attraction. They had a huge database from England, and they used 32andMe. And then they replicated to check authenticity on a large sample in Sweden. Results were that, first of all, there was no gay gene. There was no single gene. There were hundreds of genes that contributed some prediction, and they correlated with all kinds of things. Openness to new experience, marijuana use, mental health concerns, all kinds of different things contributed and correlated. This was just rock solid research. And the predictability, the percentage of prediction of same-sex sexual behavior maxed out at between 8% and 25%, meaning that 75 to 92% would be attributed to environmental factors. So that's interesting. Now, there have been other large-scale studies that have been done. You might think, okay, Jeff, you really having some guy there who has strong heterosexual feelings. So he's bisexual. Well, that's a minority. There aren't a lot of bisexuals. Most people fall. In the culture, that's absolutely the dogma. That bisexual is rare. People are generally gay or they're not gay. That's kind of what they are. We have one of the top flight researchers on same-sex attraction is Lisa Diamond at the University of Utah. She self-identified as a lesbian and a very adamant gay activist. And also intellectually honest, which I find really refreshing. I love her stuff. So she is going to report from a number of large national health surveys done in the United States and other countries where they have thousands of respondents. And she's going to be talking about the population that reports some level of same-sex attraction. People who report no same-sex attraction, she's not talking. She says, I don't find them very interesting. We're only going to talk about people who experience some level of same-sex attraction. So that's the population she's talking about. She starts by talking about models, what we would predict if certain models were true, that there's really not much bisexuality and other sorts of models, and then she goes to the outcome research. So let's just watch a clip here.
Couple of the data sets, because they all are going to be remarkably similar, as you're going to find. But what I want to put in your brain and in your eyes is what we would expect to see if certain models held true. So I'm going to put up, hypothetical model number one. And for all of these, for all the data that I'm going to show you, the categories that are going to be shown are the mostly other sex category. In other words, I'm mostly heterosexual, but not completely. Equally attracted to both sexes, mostly, but not completely, attracted to the same sex or only same sex, exclusively gay, exclusively same-sex attracted. I'm always taking the exclusive heterosexuals off the graph because they're so boring and I have no interest in them. So as a result, we're only, it's always going to be, ranging up to sort of 10% of the population, because in every study that's been done, around 90% of the population ends up being heterosexual. And we're always going to be dividing between men and women. So hypothetical model number one is that there are very few bisexuals in either men or women, that the gender differences aren't that big, but you just don't find very many bisexuals. And that would look like this, right? This is my hypothetical version of that, where you find that most of the same-sex attracted individuals are the yellow bars, right? They're the only same-sex folks. And then you have a smattering of bisexuals and the both sexes and mostly same-sex. And then, nobody really knows what to expect of the mostly heterosexuals, because, they're not supposed to exist at all, right? So, there might be a few of those because they're confused. Then there's hypothetical model two, which would be all women are bisexual, but no men are. All men are exclusively gay. And that you would expect to look something like this, where for the exclusively same-sex attracted folks, they'd basically be a large proportion of the men and almost none of the women. The bisexuals would basically be all the women and none of the men. You still wouldn't expect, and again, for women it might be that they are equally divided between the both sexes and the mostly same sex, which is also sort of a bisexual category. And you still wouldn't expect very much action in the mostly heterosexual group. So, what's it going to be? Is it going to be no bisexuals, which would look like this, or female bisexuals only, which would look like this? So what do we find if we look at the 13,000 individuals surveyed in the National Survey of Family Growth in 2002? Neither, right? Basically, you see that most of the population of same-sex attracted folks are the mostly heterosexuals, who we didn't really think anything was going to happen with at all. If you just focus on these three groups, the both sexes, mostly same sex and only sex, you definitely find that there are more exclusively gay men than exclusively gay women, but they're not even 2% of the men. If you include the bisexual categories, you definitely see that there's more bisexual women than bisexual men, but still, these groups are totally overshadowed by the huge population of mostly other sex attracted individuals. If you add up all of the same-sex attracted individuals, you find that 14% of the women, fall into in these four categories. 7% of men, so 93% of men are exclusively heterosexual, and 86% of women are exclusively heterosexual. But among the same-sex attracted group, among this 14% and the 7% of the population that claims any same-sex attractions, 75% of those women are in the mostly heterosexual group, and 55% of the men. They're the majority. The majority. The exclusively same-sex attracted folks represent only 5% of the women. Only 5% of the same-sex attracted women are exclusively attracted to the same sex. Only 21% of the men. And if you add up all of the non-exclusive folks, they represent 95% of the same-sex attracted women and 79% of the same-sex attracted men. Now I'd be like, wow, that's so crazy. That must be some wacky sample. What happens in National Survey of Family Growth? It must be something wrong with it. Well, they did the same survey in 2008. Totally new sample, different samples, same methodology. And what do they find? Pretty much exactly the same thing in almost exactly the same proportions. Then there's other fun studies to look at. The National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, which in wave 3, how old were the kids in wave 3? Do you remember off the top of your head? 28? What do you find? Pretty much the same thing. What about wave 4? You find a lot more women in the mostly other sex category. Instead of changing the scale on the graph, I just let the women soar up through the heavens of their mostly heterosexuality. What about the New Zealand cohort? Here's age 21, same basic picture. Here's age 26, same basic picture. Here's age 32, same basic picture, right? And in fact, if you look at all, and I've plotted these graphs for almost all of these studies, they all look the same. In every single one of them, the mostly heterosexual category is the single largest group of same-sex attracted individuals. You always find more exclusively attracted men than women, but that's still overshadowed, right? So I want to plot for you. I took all of those studies and I plotted them over time. So if we just look at the proportion of each sample that was exclusively attracted to the same sex, right? This is what you find. So we're only going up to 3%, right? Even most of those studies find between 2.5%, around 2.5% of men being exclusively attracted to women, at the most. And for women, it tends to be less than 1% of the total population. And so you find a robust gender difference, right? You do find consistently that there are, in population-based studies, more exclusively attracted men than exclusively attracted women. If we look at bisexual patterns of attraction, in other words, anything that's attractions to the same sex and the other sex, regardless of what the ratio of attractions is, you find the opposite pattern. Far more women than men. And here, we're up to 20% of the population, right? We've taken a totally different scale, right? And actually the best way to get a sense of how much more common bisexual attractions are than exclusive attractions is to superimpose them. I decided to put along the bottom little black bars to represent in these same surveys the proportion of the population that's exclusively attracted, and there they are, right? Now keep in mind that for, ever since the history of research on sexual orientation, we've been studying lesbians and gay men and not bisexuals, presuming that they are the modal type of gay person. Are they? Are they? Are they down here? Right? The other thing that I think is really interesting.
That's good, as far as we'll go on that. Interesting. Very interesting. I will tell you that fits my experience of people who walk into my office. It's not unusual for me to see a client who, I've seen a number of clients who had no same-sex attraction except for same-sex pornography. Very attracted to women out there, you know, etc. And so the idea that if somebody experiences any level of homosexual attraction, we can't touch that. It's an illegitimate goal and they can't set that goal. The idea that people fall neatly into gay or straight categories, that people are biologically destined to do that, boy, those just don't hold up. Now let's say some things that this research does not show. It does not show that people choose to have homosexual feelings. It doesn't show that at all. It doesn't show that these feelings can or should be easily changed. Okay? And so my favorite example is, you know, in the culture, it's were they born that way or did they choose it? Were they born that way or did they choose it? And I always say to my clients, let's do a thought experiment. You never watched a child learn to speak English. Nobody ever described that to you. Wouldn't the most common, easy assumption be that you were born speaking English? Do you remember a time you didn't speak English? Do you remember choosing to speak English? Okay, so which was it? Were you born speaking English or did you choose to speak English? That dichotomy, born that way or chose it, is one of the most destructive, erroneous, crazy, false dichotomies that has saturated this culture. Because most people can clearly see people didn't choose this, so it only leaves one alternative. One alternative. If you want to hear a discussion of that takes it apart in detail, I would refer you to a talk that I gave at Fair Mormon that has just been put on, and we'll flash out at the end, Thinking Differently About Same-Sex Attraction. It's either a podcast, you can see it listen to it as a podcast, or watch a video on YouTube of Thinking Differently About Same-Sex, where we address this issue of causation. But let's go back to this question of this client. Let's go back to this.
I'm going to show you just a couple of the data.
If we go back to the client, the description of in his 20s, now in his 20s, there. So here's the client, male, mid-20s, et cetera, et cetera. What things can he change in his life? And what things can he not change? Let's begin with what he cannot change. What can't this young man change? Any thoughts about what he can't change? He can't change his age, yeah, okay. His past, he can't change his past. He can't change what's happened to him, what he's done, what he's experienced, what he's gone through. He can't erase his past, absolutely not. Anything else? Yes?
You can't change how the church views morality.
Can't change the church's view on morality, yeah.
I have a question on the past. There are many people who subscribe to the idea that personal history, the feeling states can be shifted from the past. So, there's a question. You can't change the memory or the history.
That's the feeling state about the past. Yeah, absolutely. So he probably can change how he feels about or interprets the past, but he can't change the events of the past. I like that. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Can I tell you something else I found that he can't change? He cannot change the fact that he knows how to be aroused by men. He can't change that. Now notice I phrased that very carefully. He cannot change the fact that he knows how to be aroused by men. He knows how. Okay? I always talk to clients that say when it comes to change, we say I'm here and I want to change and be over here. But that's not the way most human beings operate. It's I'm here and I expand my repertoire. I've got a broader range of things I'm capable of doing now. I don't erase these. And that's critically important for my clients because some days they'll find themselves right back here again. And then what do they say? Nothing changed. I'm right back where I started. And I'll say, no, you know how to do all these other things now. But yeah, this is still in the neural pathways of your brain. Still in the neural pathways of your brain. So there's some things he can't change, and he's going to have to accept in the Serenity Prayer. Accept, and once he accepts them, right, they stop mattering so much. It's when I've got to change them. What things can he change? What things can this client change? Let's just throw out a few.
His health.
His health? Okay, so he can be physically fit?
Yep.
Okay, what else can he change? his beliefs about himself, behavior. Somebody said behaviors. Okay, what kind of behaviors can he change?
A lot of symptoms can be changed,
Okay, a lot of symptoms.
which come from dissociated places that are stored inside, usually and sometimes outside. Programming.
Okay, programming. I want to get more surface, not deep therapy, but what can he change about his life if he wants to work towards those goals? Yes? Yeah, he can stop viewing same-sex pornography, masturbation, fantasy over time. Here's an interesting question. Is this person capable of chastity?
Yes.
Moral, personal purity? Okay? Often in the culture, we sort of think no. If he's got same-sex attraction issues, that's too much to ask of him. Okay? Well, personal purity and morality is difficult for most, well, it's for most men and for a lot of women. I think it was Thomas Aquinas. I loved his prayer when he said, "Oh God, make me chaste, but not yet." But not yet. And when I was a kid, there was a joke going around about a couple that were making out in the back seat of the car. And the boy pushed it too far, and the girl said, "If you do that 2 more times, I'm getting out of this car." Purity, personal purity. And I will tell you that when clients can do this, so when Elder Oak says it's about chastity, when they can become chaste, same-sex attraction becomes much less of an issue. Doesn't automatically replace it with opposite-sex attraction, necessarily. Although, if they've got opposite-sex attraction, the same-sex attraction is dwarfing and they become chaste, sometimes this feels a lot more pronounced. So they can be chaste. What else can he change?
Well, your comment on personal purity, I think I have a problem with that because what is purity? That's perfection. So if he has a thought that he can't.
Great point. We're not going to go there for very long, but you're absolutely right. We talk about what's the difference between a thought and a fantasy and what can you control. You can't control things from popping into your head. Absolutely not. They have to accept that thoughts will pop in. If they don't, they're going to panic, right? So it's a great point. Great point. What else can he change? Yes?
He can change his deep religious beliefs and commitment.
Deep religious beliefs and commitment. Give them up or deepen them or just shift them or?
Any of those.
I'm going to use that as a segue to jump to 10 religious beliefs that decrease a client's sense of agency, autonomy, and power, and shame them. Okay? And we could spend an entire hour. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to go through them. First, when I turned 8 years old, I automatically started to have 100% agency. On my 10th birthday, suddenly I had full agency. Okay? Full agency. Second, I have to be married in this life or I cannot have salvation. Must be married. Oh boy, I tell clients, you have to be willing to not be married to increase the probability that you'll get married. You know, if you must, you won't. You will never be tempted beyond your ability to resist. God won't allow it. God won't allow that. Not a lot of therapists believe that, but it's...
Only if you're righteous.
Only if you're... Only if you're righteous, then you won't be tempted. But these are things that they walk in, and we have to sort of address these sorts of things. God is hard to please. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. He said, God is easy to please, and hard to satisfy. I watched all my children learn to walk. Their first steps were clapping and cheering. We're so pleased. When are we satisfied? No, not till they can run and jump and kick a ball and go for a hike. You know, we won't satisfy him in this life, but I tell my clients, you can please him tonight, and you can feel it tonight. Today you can please him. He's easy to please. The atonement makes anything possible. Anything. Sometimes people talk about the atonement, which I have such faith in, but as though it's a magical incantation that can erase neural pathways in our brain, that can, can just completely transform us magically, but most of our clients don't experience that. You know, it's Paul's thorn in the flesh, right? Next 5. All weakness is sin. You know, a transgression, a sin, and a weakness are all the same thing, and I'm still held accountable for them. I can't be perfect, but I can come really close. I can come really close. This is one I hear all the time. The same Spirit that rises with us. You know, for this Book of Mormon scripture, the same Spirit that rises with. Therefore, all of my temptations, all of my burdens, everything is going to rise with me. Whatever degree of perfection I can achieve in this life, that's all I'm going to have. That's all I'm going to have. And people ask me, well, am I going to struggle with this in the next life? And I'll say, I don't think you will. When I was a kid, I remember being told, you know, if you die with a tobacco addiction, you're still going to have that, and it's going to be a lot harder to overcome when you don't have a body. And I tell my clients, no, I think that those things will rot in the grave with you. We're told that we will rest from all our trials and our burdens, and they picture it coming with them. Spiritual rebirth will permanently end all temptation. If I can just be born again of the Spirit, I will have no more weaknesses, no more propensities, no more anything. It will just completely transform me. What I tell clients is, being born again of the Spirit will, to the degree you can maintain it, because for most of us it's a high maintenance proposition. It's got a short shelf life. As we grow and as we maintain it, it will cure you of the only thing that can damn you, and that is willful rebellion. Willful rebellion, okay? And all sexual transgressions are equal. Boy, have you heard that? You know, I've had kids come in and say to me, kid came in with just a masturbation problem. That's all. No pornography, nothing. And he said, I pray to God, please let me die so I can stop being such a horrible person. So as we talk about a client's spiritual religious belief, watching out for those, and there are others. That's just 10 that I come up with pretty quick from my experience. Those things we might need to refine and talk to the client about. Yes?
Can I say that I feel relieved?
Because?
Some of these have shown up in my belief system.
Oh.
Yeah, but
well,
it's nice to have the validation of change.
You shouldn't feel too relieved, because they're not true for our clients, but they might be for us.
Oh, okay.
You just don't know.
I'm choosing relief.
Okay, choosing. I like that. I like that. Choosing relief. That's great. That's great. Let me tell you 3 other things, and that's probably the end of our PowerPoints, but 3 things. When I work with a client for a while, and we work towards those sorts of goals, I wound up boiling down to 10 things that work. And I say, are these the 10? And then when a client's coming in, you know, after a couple of months to sort of do a checkup kind of a thing, I'll say, let's talk about the 10 things that work and see if we can get a letter grade on each one of them. You know, and we'll go through the 10 things that work. And yeah, this is the fair presentation, and that's getting it on YouTube. And then my website and my Gmail. So we talk about the 10 things that work, and most of them are prayer, scripture study, avoiding pornography by keeping boundaries, having a healthy social life, not keeping this a secret, not hiding it, not seeking arousal on purpose, living your life as if. But there are 3 that are specific to same-sex attraction. A lot of them are just living a healthy life. But 3 specific to same-sex attraction, and we don't have time to discuss them. I'm just going to mention them. 1, assertive apathy. Assertive apathy. These clients often obsess about same-sex attraction. They've written papers in school about it. They're online looking at it. They watch television shows with gay characters. They're talking with people about this constantly. It's, if this is a problem for me, I have to know how it's being presented in popular culture, what the science is saying, etc. I teach them, leave it alone. It's triggering you again and again, triggering neural pathways in your brain. So we talk about assertive apathy in some detail. Second, we talk about the principle that if a thought or a feeling you have is not sexual, it is not homosexual. Period. End of story. If it's not sexual, it is not homosexual. So many of these young men who are very bright, introspective, self-analytical, see everything. The kind of movies I like, the kind of food I like to eat, the fact I like music, the fact I'm expressive, all of these things are part of my homosexuality. And I want to get them away from that. If it is not sexual, it is not homosexual. You can have a man crush, you can admire somebody, you can wish somebody could be your friend, you can be jealous of somebody, you can be twittipated, you can, all these things. And that doesn't mean it might not be unhealthy. You can be clingy, you can be so envious you get depressed and hate your life. Those are problems, but if it's not sexual, it's not homosexual. I ask him, could you imagine a man who's never been aroused by another man having the thoughts or feelings you're having right now? If you can, it is not homosexual. And they grab hold of that like a drowning man grabs hold of a life raft. And I'll say to him, if I could get you to believe that 100%, what percent of your problem would we have taken care of just by defining it carefully? And it's always 70, 80, 90%. They are broadly interpreting everything. If it's all these thoughts and feelings. So we go, assertive apathy, leave it alone. If it's not sexual, it's not homosexual. And when it is sexual, you have to understand this is just something you know how to do. It's not a biologically determined thing. It's not something you've chosen. It's not a symptom of mental illness. Okay? It is just simply nothing but something you know how to do. Now, I think the same thing is true, by the way, about heterosexuality. I believe that all sexual arousal patterns are acquired. And I believe that the idea that they're not, that we have an innate biological heterosexual drive has played great mischief in this culture, because it means if that didn't develop for me, and if a homosexual thing developed, something really huge must have gone wrong. I must have been evil or sexually abused or have deep biological causes. To derail that heterosexual locomotive that comes down, barreling down those biological tracks, to knock that off, something huge. But if it's all acquired, and if it's self-reinforcing, maybe it didn't take that much. So when it is sexual, when they have a thought, a fantasy, a dream, a pattern, I say, this is just something you know how to do. So I ask clients, we'll go over that. Assertive apathy, if it's not sexual, it's not homosexual. And what it is, it's just something you know how to do. And I'll say, which of those three has been most important to you? 2/3 of the time, at least, it is that it's just something you know how to do. The whole tug-of-war in this culture over cause somehow means a lot. It seems to imply whether it's malleable, it seems to imply whether it's going to come after me or I'm going to go after it. I'm going to go after it. I'm going to end with a metaphor I share with clients all the time. It's a thought experiment. Let's imagine for a minute I know how to play the piano. I don't, but let's say I do. I had a biological predisposition, a talent, a skill for the piano. My mom made me stay in and practice and practice and practice, and now I can play that piano super well. That's the first fact about me. Second fact about me, how much I want to play the piano. I'll show you two ends of the spectrum. One, I live and breathe piano. It's my whole life. It's all I can think about. I can't walk by a keyboard without wanting to sit down and tickle those ivories. It's who I am. It's how people know me. It's how I express emotion. It's how I comfort myself. It's everything. Other end of the spectrum, I don't care if I ever see another stinking piano for as long as I live. Been there, done that. Thousands of positions in between. So first, I know how. Second, how much I want to. Third, how I feel about myself because of my piano playing. Maybe I'm snooty and think, well, really refined, proper people are musical. I'm certainly in that category. Maybe I'm lazy. I hope people don't find out I'm playing the piano. They'll always want me to do it. Maybe I'm embarrassed. Oh, guys who play the piano, that's a stereotype. Maybe I've honed my victimhood to a fine polish. my mom ruined my life because of that stinking piano. It's ruined my life. And dozens of other ways of feeling about myself. So these three facts: I know how to play, how much I want to, and how I feel about myself. Of those three, the first one, how much I know how to play it, changes very slowly, if at all. These other two, how much I want to and how I feel about myself, change all the time. They change over time and between circumstances. Now let's think about same-sex attraction. It's what I say to my clients. Perhaps I know how to be aroused by other guys. I know how. I've looked at pornography, I've done it, I've fantasized, I really can get aroused by guys. Second, how much do I want to? Boy, I'm deep into an addiction, or gosh, it's not a problem for me, I really don't want to do it. Third, how I feel about myself. Shame, pride, guilt, defensiveness, etc. I know how much I want to, and how I feel about myself as a result of it. Of those three, this first one changes very slowly, if at all, knowing how. These other two, how much I feel compelled to do it, how much I want to, and how I feel about myself, they shift all the time, over time and between circumstances. And of those three things, knowing how much I want to, and how I feel about myself, these second two are where all of the pain is. All of it. They think the pain is in the first one, the fact that I know how. But through acceptance and leading a committed life and the changing the things I can change that we've talked about today, these next two become much less of an issue. How much I want to creates worthiness issues. How I feel about myself, shame, hopelessness, despair, confusion. Those two can change all the time. But this first one changes slowly, if at all, but it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to. Once we accept it and move forward with our lives, My experience with dozens and dozens, hundreds of young men have been that when they can accept the things they can't change and change the things they can move forward and have great lives, great lives. And we ought not, again, back to that Mark Twain quote, it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. There's a lot that we know for sure about same-sex attraction, about how it comes down, about distributions, about causes that just ain't so. That just ain't so. So thank you for your time.